Let's get right into it. Number 10. The high heel sitting in your closet started as battlefield gear, not fashion, not a style choice. Persian cavalry soldiers in the 10th century wore heeled shoes so their feet would lock into stirrups while they fired arrows from horseback. The heel dug in and kept the foot from sliding forward mid-shot. When Persian delegations traveled to Europe in the 1600s, European aristocrats saw the shoes and copied them, not for war, but for status. Louis XIV wore red-heeled shoes to signal he never had to walk through muddy streets like a commoner. His heels reached nearly 4 inches. That's not a fashion statement. That's a man announcing he's never touched dirt in his life. Over the next century, the heel drifted from men's wardrobes to women's, and the meaning flipped from military to decorative. Nobody riding in a car today needs a shoe that locks their foot into a stirrup. And yet the shape survived, stitched into red carpets and wedding aisles centuries after the war it was built for. Next time someone struggles across a parking lot in stilettos, remember, they're technically wearing archery equipment. Number 9. The color mauve once poisoned the men who made it. In 1856, an 18-year-old chemist named William Perkin was trying to synthesize a malaria drug in his home lab in London. He failed completely. What he got instead was a sludge that dyed silk a brilliant purple. That accident launched the synthetic dye industry, and mauve became the hottest color in Victorian fashion within 3 years. Queen Victoria wore it to her daughter's wedding. But the factories that scaled up production used arsenic-based compounds to stabilize other dyes in the same color family, and workers handling the dyes developed skin ulcers and lung damage. Some historians estimate certain dye workshops saw illness in a majority of their staff. So the same decade that made purple dresses fashionable also made purple a quiet occupational hazard. There's something almost cruelly efficient about that. A chemistry mistake creating a luxury good, and that luxury good creating a public health problem, all inside 1 decade. Nobody buying a violet-colored ribbon in 1862 was thinking about lung tissue. They just wanted to match the Queen. Number 8. The teddy bear on a child's bed is named after a hunting trip that ended in a mercy kill. In 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt went on a bear hunt in Mississippi. His guides cornered an old black bear, clubbed it, and tied it to a tree so Roosevelt could shoot it easily. He refused, calling it unsportsmanlike, and had the suffering animal killed instead to end its pain. A political cartoonist turned the moment into a drawing, and a Brooklyn shop owner asked permission to sell a stuffed bear called Teddy's Bear. The toy sold out. Within a few years, teddy bears were a nursery staple across the country. So the softest object in a lot of childhoods traces back to a wounded, half-blind bear tied to a tree in the Mississippi woods. That's the kind of origin story you don't put on the gift tag. The bear in the cartoon looks almost cute, which is its own quiet trick, since the real event was closer to a battlefield mercy shot than a bedtime story. Somewhere in a child's arms tonight is a stuffed animal named after an act of ending suffering, not preventing it. Number 7. The Barbie doll has a German bar patron as an ancestor, not a fashion designer, not a toy engineer. In the 1950s, a German comic strip called Bild Lilli featured a sharp-tongued, gold-digging woman who traded favors with wealthy men. The strip spun off a novelty doll sold in bars and tobacco shops, marketed to adult men as a gag gift, not to children. Ruth Handler, an American businesswoman, spotted the doll on a trip to Europe in 1956 and brought samples home. 3 years later, Mattel released Barbie, reworking the figure into a children's toy while keeping the same proportions and adult-styled face. Mattel eventually bought the rights to the original doll to avoid legal trouble, quietly settling the matter in 1964. So the doll found in millions of little girls' bedrooms was, in its first form, sold next to cigarettes as a joke about mistresses. Nobody designing a dollhouse in 1962 mentioned that detail. It's the kind of fact that changes how you look at a pink plastic convertible. Number 6. The Ouija board once sat on store shelves, labeled as a legitimate scientific instrument. Not a toy, not a party gag. When it launched in 1890, the patent application specifically claimed the board could answer questions concerning the past, present and future with marvelous accuracy, and the inventors demonstrated it for skeptical patent officers using a session that reportedly gave the officer his own name correctly, despite no one in the room supposedly knowing it. That convinced the patent office to grant approval. The board rode the wave of spiritualism, a movement in which millions of Americans believed the dead could be contacted through mediums. Sales spiked hardest during wartime, when families desperate to reach lost soldiers bought boards by the thousands. It's a strange arc. A piece of varnished wood goes from patent office demonstration to seance parlor to sleepover dare in about a century. These days it gets pulled out at slumber parties for a cheap scare. Back then, grieving parents treated it like a working phone line to a dead son. Number 5. The lawn dart sitting forgotten in a garage was once classified, functionally, as a javelin. In the 1950s and 60s, families played backyard games with metal-tipped darts weighing about half a pound, launched high into the air to land in a target ring. The problem is a half-pound metal spike falling from a height builds serious force, and it doesn't care whether it lands in the grass or in a child's skull. By the mid-1980s, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission linked the toy to multiple child deaths and thousands of emergency room visits. In 1988, the agency banned the sale of lawn darts as a children's product entirely. Compare that to today's playgrounds, padded and rubberized to cushion a fall from 3 feet, and it's strange to remember that a previous generation handed kids something closer to a weapon and called it recreation. The dry irony is that lawn darts were marketed as the safe alternative to actual javelin throwing. They just moved the danger from the field to the backyard, and nobody updated the warning label until the damage was already counted. Number 4. The Slinky was designed to keep warships from shaking themselves apart. In 1943, naval engineer Richard James was working on tension springs meant to stabilize sensitive equipment on ships during rough seas. One spring fell off a shelf, and instead of crashing down, it walked itself end over end across the floor, down a stack of books and onto the table. James wasn't trying to invent a toy. He was trying to stop delicate instruments from rattling apart under wave impact. His wife suggested selling the spring as a novelty, and in 1945, the Slinky sold out its first 400 units in 90 minutes at a Philadelphia department store. Compare that to modern product launches with months of marketing behind them, and a leftover ship part beat all of them in an hour and a half with zero advertising. There's something fitting about a toy built entirely from a failure. The engineer set out to stop something from moving unpredictably, and ended up creating an object whose entire appeal is that it moves unpredictably down your stairs. Number 3. The saxophone was invented by a man who survived his own childhood so many times that Belgian villagers reportedly called him the ghost. Adolphe Sax, born in 1814, fell down a flight of stairs and cracked his skull, swallowed a needle, drank sulfuric acid by accident, and survived being struck by a roof tile and a gunpowder explosion, all before adulthood, according to accounts from his own biographers. He grew up to invent the saxophone in the early 1840s, an instrument built to bridge the gap between brass and woodwind sections in military bands. The instrument nearly died too. Competing instrument makers and military band politics in France tied Sax up in patent lawsuits for decades, and he went bankrupt more than once trying to defend his invention. So an instrument now associated with smoky jazz clubs and laid-back solos was built by a man who dodged death about half a dozen times, and then spent his adult life fighting in court instead. It's hard to imagine a smoother sound coming from a rougher backstory. Every slow saxophone note in a jazz bar is, in a strange way, a man's revenge against his own bad luck. Number 2. The Twinkies yellow sponge cake was invented as a way to reuse expensive equipment that would otherwise sit idle. In 1930, a bakery manager named James Dewar noticed the machines used to make cream-filled strawberry shortcakes only worked during the short strawberry season, sitting unused the rest of the year. He created a banana cream-filled cake using the same machines, and named it after a shoe advertisement he saw for twinkle-toe shoes. During World War II, banana shortages forced a switch to vanilla cream, and the substitute became permanent because people preferred it. So the flavor now considered classic Americana exists only because of a wartime supply shortage, not because anyone designed it that way. Compare that to how most snack foods get focus grouped and flavor tested for years before release. The Twinkies' defining flavor was basically a rationing accident that nobody bothered to correct once the war ended. It's a snack built entirely from idle machinery and a war shortage, and somehow it outlived both the equipment and the war by nearly a century. Number 1. The stethoscope was invented because a doctor didn't want to put his ear on a woman's chest. In 1816, French physician René Laennec was examining an overweight female patient and felt it inappropriate to press his ear directly against her body, the standard method at the time. He recalled that sound travels well through solid wood, rolled a sheet of paper into a tight tube, and pressed one end to her chest and the other to his ear. The heartbeat came through clearer than direct contact ever gave him. He refined the design into a wooden tube instrument he named the stethoscope, from Greek words meaning chest and to view. Within a few decades, it became standard equipment across Western medicine, all stemming from one moment of social awkwardness in a Paris examination room. Compare that to modern medical devices, engineered in labs over years of trials. This one came from a rolled-up piece of paper and a doctor's discomfort. Every stethoscope hanging around a doctor's neck today exists because one man in 1816 would rather solve an engineering problem than have an awkward moment. That's all 10. If your brain enjoyed that little detour into hidden history, subscribe for more.